Spider-Man. Brand New Day is reportedly soaring past $2.1 billion worldwide, and that success is creating an uncomfortable comparison for DC Studios. While Sony's Spider-Man is gaining momentum with audiences, Supergirl continues to face criticism over its theatrical performance. And now, Milly Alcock is pushing back against people comparing the two movies, while also revealing what fans can supposedly expect from Ana Nogueira's upcoming take on Wonder Woman. But there's one part of Milly's comments that could create an even bigger controversy for DC. Because according to her, the version of Wonder Woman being developed could share some major similarities with the way Supergirl was written. And if that really happens, DC could be walking into another enormous backlash before the movie even reaches theaters. Before we break all of that down, make sure you subscribe to the WokeWatch so you don't miss the latest Hollywood and DC updates. Now, let's get into what Milly Alcock actually said and why these comments are getting so much attention. The timing of all of this is particularly interesting because Spider-Man Brand New Day continues to dominate the box office conversation. The film has reportedly passed the $2.1 billion mark worldwide, with expectations that it could potentially climb even higher depending on how its theatrical run continues. And regardless of where the final number ends up, that kind of performance naturally creates comparisons with other major superhero releases. That's especially true for DC, because Supergirl entered theaters with enormous expectations surrounding the future of the new DC universe. One reason audiences appear to be responding so strongly to Brand New Day is that the movie has largely allowed itself to function as a Spider-Man story. Instead of making the film feel like nothing more than another massive franchise crossover, the movie has reportedly focused heavily on its central character and delivered something that feels distinct from Tom Holland's previous 3 Spider-Man films. That difference has become part of the appeal. There are also major surprises within the movie that have generated additional conversation, giving audiences another reason to remain interested. And that's where the comparison with Supergirl becomes unavoidable. While Sony is celebrating a huge theatrical result, DC has been dealing with continuing criticism surrounding its female-led superhero movie. That contrast has put even more attention on the people defending Supergirl, including James Gunn, Milly Alcock, writer Ana Nogueira, Warner Bros. Discovery leadership, and DC Studios producer Peter Safran. Now, Milly Alcock has decided to address the comparison herself, and her argument is essentially that people shouldn't be judging Supergirl against a movie like Spider-Man in the first place. Milly argued that calling Supergirl forgettable is unfair because, from her perspective, the movie was specifically designed to put female characters at the center of the story. She pointed toward Kara Zor-El and Ruthie as examples and discussed the movie's themes surrounding gender and what she described as toxic masculinity. According to Milly, James Gunn had discussed those themes with both her and Ana Nogueira before filming began, and those ideas eventually became part of the story. She also praised Nogueira's writing and suggested that the movie's themes were intentionally built into Kara's journey. But Milly strongly objected to the idea that Supergirl should be compared directly with Spider-Man based on their box office performances. Her argument is that a female-led superhero movie faces a different environment from a male-led franchise, particularly in the current entertainment landscape. She also defended Kara Zor-El as a positive role model for women and girls. Milly acknowledged that Kara is dealing with serious personal problems throughout the story, including drinking and destructive coping mechanisms following the destruction of her world. However, she believes those flaws are part of what makes Kara's journey meaningful. She also claimed that Kara receives a redemption arc by the conclusion of the movie and described it as one of the strongest live-action interpretations of the character's redemption. That's obviously a point that has generated disagreement among viewers, because one of the biggest criticisms surrounding Supergirl has been whether the movie actually delivers the character development it claims to deliver. And that brings us to the second, and potentially much bigger, part of Milly's comments. Milly didn't stop at defending Supergirl. She also started talking about what Ana Nogueira is reportedly doing with Wonder Woman. Milly claimed that Nogueira has already given her some hints about the upcoming project and teased that fans could see a very different version of Diana Prince when the movie eventually arrives. More importantly, Milly suggested there could be major similarities between the way Kara Zor-El was handled in Supergirl and the way Diana will be portrayed in Nogueira's interpretation of Wonder Woman. That's a pretty significant statement, because if audiences already have strong opinions about the characterization of Kara in Supergirl, announcing that some of those creative ideas could carry over into another major DC heroine is almost guaranteed to generate debate. Milly even suggested that some DC fans, particularly male fans, may have difficulty accepting this new version of Wonder Woman. Her argument is that characters have to reflect the modern era and that audiences need to adapt to changing interpretations of female superheroes. She believes Nogueira will deliver a version of Wonder Woman that reflects what a modern woman represents, but critics are likely to look at that statement very differently. If the characterization of Supergirl already divided audiences, then using similar creative ideas with one of DC's most recognizable characters could potentially produce an even stronger reaction. And that's something DC Studios will have to consider very carefully. The timing is also important because the DC Universe has several major projects moving forward. There's Superman, Supergirl, Clayface, Lanterns, Man of Tomorrow, Wonder Woman, Teen Titans, and other projects reportedly in development. That's a huge number of projects being developed within a relatively short period. And critics of James Gunn's DC strategy have argued that the studio may be trying to establish an entire cinematic universe too quickly. The Marvel Cinematic Universe spent years gradually introducing characters, connecting stories, and building audience investment. The concern with DC is that audiences may not have enough time to develop that same level of attachment before the franchise starts moving rapidly into its next wave of projects. That's why the performance of each major release matters. If one project struggles, the next film has to carry even more pressure. And if another major project disappoints, that pressure can compound. This is particularly important for Man of Tomorrow, which is expected to play a major role in the continuing DC storyline and could feature significant connections to other characters. If audiences remain divided over the way Supergirl has been handled, then any heavy focus on Kara moving forward could become another potential flashpoint. And that could eventually affect how audiences view future projects, including Wonder Woman. Milly also addressed the personal criticism she and Ana Nogueira have received. She described the backlash as bullying and argued that both she and Nogueira had to deal with an enormous amount of online hostility. Milly said she had prepared herself for that reaction and believed James Gunn had warned them ahead of time that misogynistic and sexist criticism would become part of the conversation. She suggested that the experience was particularly difficult for Nogueira because Supergirl represented her story and her creative vision. Now, this is where the conversation becomes complicated. There's an important distinction between attacking someone personally and criticizing a movie. If someone targets an actor or writer with harassment simply because they don't like a film, that's obviously different from someone explaining why they believe the screenplay, characterization, pacing, or story didn't work. Those two things shouldn't automatically be treated as the same criticism. And that distinction is important because some fans feel that whenever they criticize the creative decisions in Supergirl, the conversation immediately shifts toward accusations of sexism or toxic fandom. That's a debate DC Studios and its supporters will probably continue having for a long time. But beyond Supergirl itself, there's an even bigger question. Can the new DC universe actually reach the cultural impact of the MCU? That's still impossible to know. The Marvel Cinematic Universe didn't become a global phenomenon overnight. It built its audience over many years through interconnected characters, successful individual franchises, major crossover events, and consistent audience investment. DC is now attempting to establish its own interconnected universe under James Gunn and Peter Safran. But the sheer number of projects currently being discussed makes the strategy feel extremely ambitious. Superman, Supergirl, Clayface, Lanterns, Man of Tomorrow, Wonder Woman, Teen Titans, and additional projects beyond those. The question isn't whether DC can produce that many movies and shows. The question is whether audiences will actually care about all of them. Because quantity alone doesn't create a cinematic universe. Audience attachment does. And that's why every major release matters so much right now. If Superman succeeds, it gives DC momentum. If Supergirl struggles, that momentum takes a hit. If Man of Tomorrow succeeds, the studio has another opportunity to rebuild confidence. And if Wonder Woman eventually delivers something audiences love, that could completely change the conversation again. But if several of these projects fail to connect with viewers, then the criticism surrounding DC's strategy will only become louder. So Milly Alcock's comments have opened up a much bigger discussion than simply whether Supergirl deserves to be compared with Spider-Man. We're talking about the direction of DC's female characters, Ana Nogueira's future involvement with the franchise, the upcoming Wonder Woman movie, the role of Supergirl in future DC projects, and whether James Gunn's overall strategy is moving too quickly. And perhaps the most interesting part is that Milly herself has now suggested that the creative approach used with Kara Zor-El could have similarities with what audiences eventually see from Diana Prince. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing will ultimately be decided by the audience. For now, though, the comparison between Spider-Man, Brand New Day, and Supergirl isn't going away. One movie is generating enormous box office momentum, while the other continues to face questions about its theatrical performance and the direction of the franchise surrounding it. So what do you think? Do you believe it's unfair to compare Supergirl's performance with Spider-Man, or is the comparison completely justified when both are major superhero releases? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.